landlordism, it's the redistribution of income, but in completely the wrong direction, if that makes sense. It is the transfer of wealth from the wage class to the asset class. It is the people who own housing, extracting a rent. I mean, obviously, we all know this is called rent, from people who can't. And because of the way that the property market in Britain functions, that also serves to deny those people in the wage class access to owning the thing that the landlord has. So you're entrenching inequality, and you're also redistributing income away from people who actually it should be working in the opposite direction. Do I think that some landlordism to some extent is necessary in a functioning society? Yes, I do. Do I think that they should be able to charge exorbitant rents? Do I think that they should be able to provide low quality housing? Do I think that they should be able to kick their tenants out without giving any justification for doing so? No, I don't. I think if you look at those three things, you say, if you to interpret the relationship between a landlord and a tenant as a conflict, there is only one interpretation, and it is that the landlords are fucking the tenants and have been for years. Mm-hmm. I think in tandem with a healthy amount of council housing and affordable homes for people who want to buy and own them outright, there's space to have a private rented sector. The way that the private rented sector has expanded, grown, and now dominates, particularly, when I say dominates, I mean particularly amongst the younger generation, young professionals, either in urban centres or actually just sort of younger people elsewhere in the country who can't afford to own their own home. It's not right that the ratio, the composite mixture of those three different kinds of housing has shifted so dramatically towards private rented. And it's a multifaceted puzzle. There's all sorts of things to addressing that, but I think one of the most obvious and sort of short-term needed ones is an expansion and increased delivery of council housing.
Absolutely. I just the one thing I would have loved to have seen in this bill that we're not going to see, and it's way too ambitious, I think, even for a Labour government to put in, is preventing buy-to-lets on new builds. For me, it is absolutely blood-boiling rage thinking about how, Mayor of London, like similar schemes to the Mayor of London scheme, will provide affordable housing. Those houses will be purchased by landlords and then rented out for a ridiculous cost. It's outrageous that that's allowed to happen. I mean, I think there was a case as well in Oxfordshire just a couple of months ago where there were these two new builds that would have been perfect for, a starter family, lovely little houses. They're bought, they're already on the market, rented, like for rental. Mm-hmm. That is obscene. Mm-hmm. The government should be providing some kind of proper back to loan, not that crap ISA scheme that they've got going that actually allows people to buy somewhere to live in, rather than fueling a few people who are in a lobby that intimidate them into watering down legislation.
The help to buy ISA you mentioned there is you can get, it's something like 25%, right? There's 25% added on to what you've saved if you use it to buy a home, but I believe it has to be a new home. Like it has to be a brand new build or
a renovated home. Yeah,
there's some kind of distinction between. You can get something else.
It has to be renovated like dramatically.
And is it up to 10 grand?
It's it means that if you're
it's very more than, isn't it?
The ISA is up to 10 grand. In the autumn statements, Hunt is thinking about increasing that, but it basically means that you can pay about 5% of your deposit. But if you're looking in London, if you are a single person and you would like to buy, a measly little one bedroom just so that you can, not be in the rain, sleep somewhere, then you can buy like 400. It's about £400,000, isn't it, that you would need to, and the ISA doesn't quite cover that.
Saying that again.
If you're a single person.
Yeah, because you need to combine the incomes of two people, right, to get the loan value from the bank. Obviously, another way of doing that. You'd be able to do it as a single person if you had a fucking ginormous deposit, right?
Well, of course, yeah.
If you put down, let's say, I don't know, fucking 300 grand on that 400 grand house, you're then able to get a mortgage. The entire point that all of this misses is that who the hell is accruing £300,000 by themselves?
You could do it off, you could do it with about a £75,000 deposit. But if you earn, say, the London, average of £38,000, if you're paying £1,500 a month in rent, then you are not going to be able to save up said deposit.
The really frustrating thing for me in all of this as well is that within the hypothetical that you've just outlined, the monthly mortgage repayments that that person would be expected to pay will be around roughly £1,500 a month. The person you're talking about has paid their rent on time every month for the last, take your pick, 5, 10, 15 years, right? They have a track record. The whole business of when a bank is deciding to enter into a mortgage agreement with you is they're judging A, whether they're going to be able to make any money from the transaction, and B, if you're going to reliably make your payments on time. If you have a list of payments that goes, here is me paying £1,500 every single month for the last 15 years, I don't understand why that isn't evidence enough to be able to show to a bank and say, I can maintain these mortgage payments. And if you address that problem and you allow that to serve as evidence enough, and you then go to perhaps, let's say, state intervention to provide the deposit that people need. So I don't know whether you probably have to be sliding scale. You couldn't do lump sum, obviously, but for the sake of this argument, let's just say you were to give people 50 grand, 75 grand. The government gets that money back when your house is sold, but you're now paying towards an asset. You're no longer subject to the whims of a landlord. You have improved housing security and a higher degree of dignity, pride in self, pride in place, and a firmer root in the community you live in. What's to say you can't do that? Why couldn't you do that?
Yeah, I've always spoken to a number of Tories about this, about the best option that you could give young people is if you can prove that you've paid rent every single month on time for 7 years, then you should be eligible for a government-backed 100% loan. The same way that, our parents' generation were offered 110% back mortgages. And then you get into this conversation with, okay, yeah, but then what happens if you default on the payment and then we'll have another housing crisis? And it's like, listen, all right, with this rent thing, if you miss a payment, even by a day, Roger, the landlord, is taking you up the small claims court. He doesn't give a crap about you. But maybe that's like laissez-faire government, right? Because what you're doing is instead of the bank taking the risk, the landlord is taking the risk. But if you're the tenant, I'm getting really angry. I'm getting really worked up. It just annoys me so much that even the idea that somehow a government-backed loan would lead to the same 2008 housing crisis that we saw back then would be in any way similar to if you offer these government-backed loans to people who've previously paid rent on time. It's not the same.
I think the riposte to that as well is, my good man, my good parliamentary representative, there is already a housing crisis. It's just that you're not at the sharp end of it. As the average age at which someone can own a home ever increases and gradually approaches 40, there is a housing crisis in this country.
Housing emergency.
They're talking just because you own like 6 of them and you rent them out as HMOs. You don't think there's a problem with that. You don't think there's a crisis.
Yeah.
When he says there could be a crisis, what he means is landlords will have to sell the houses they own, and that is for my money not the same as quite literally millions of people not being able to get onto the housing ladder.
Yeah. Liquidate the market, my friend. Do it. That argument that they talk about, when some people go, we work really hard for this home and we deserve all of the, the price that it has accrued, over the past 20 years. And it's like, listen, Sandra, you bought this house for £35,000 and now it is worth £700,000. That is an unreasonable markup.
Yeah. I think that there's possibly an argument around that, right? There's an argument around, at the moment, capital gains tax only comes in on second homes, right? And I think as a pragmatist, you look at the increase in house value, and I think there's possibly an argument to say that either an increase in stamp duty or an expansion of capital gains to accommodate for the fact that a huge amount of people have earned, in most cases, not all, but a lot of them, 6 figures, apropos of being a boomer, basically, getting a house relatively cheap, maintaining their payments, and then 40 years later, we've heated the housing market to such an extent that it goes, all of a sudden, you've actually just produced £600,000 out your ass for doing largely nothing. Well,
also, but from benefiting from whatever infrastructure the government has put in around you, right? So if you suddenly live in an area that now has, I don't know, a nice leisure centre or a station, things that a good school, things the government have paid for, the council, you've benefited from that, right? So why do you not have to pay anything back to say, thanks for the £500,000 bonus you've given my house?
There's also a question. That's one route of doing it. The other route, and this is also an interesting one for me, is that millennials and what's the one underneath millennials? Gen Z?
Yeah.
Yeah, they stand to be so sharpest decline in living standards from the generation before coming to them. However, because of the problem we've just outlined, i.e. these people who've become incredibly wealthy without doing a great deal of necessarily work, when they die, their inheritance goes to millennials, Gen Zers, who are, whilst being pretty relatively, and when I say relatively, I mean compared to the generations that came before them, worse off. They stand to then become the richest generation later in life once that inheritance filters through. So if we were, again, to be talking about trying to redress that balance, you could possibly talk about maybe some kind of expansion of inheritance tax to kind of tap into that.
But then you're going after the potentially lower middle classes rather than going after, I actually don't believe you should go after people who've just managed to buy their own home. I would like to go after the landlords. If you pass away and you've got an entire tower block of ex-social housing, yeah, that shit's not going to your kids. No way. That's going back into the community.
Yeah.
I think that, there was some talk about Hunt in the autumn statement next month doing his little stamp duty fix again. No stamp duty. To incentivize the markets, to stimulate the markets.